All right, so we're going to be picking up in chapter 23, the prophecy behind the Pope's visit to the United States. And of course, this was a couple years ago, 8/22/2015, when the Pope came and visited, and he had his little talk with the United States Congress and everything, and he, gave his instructions to them from the Vatican, that divining serpent, giving the instructions of what their works were to be done. And of course, we see a lot of these things continuing to be carried out in this time period. We see the wars building. We see the hatred building among the nations. We see the disease epidemics, everything that Yeshua talked about in Matthew chapter 24, building up to a time when we're going to see the darkening of the sun. All right, so now let's look here at chapter 23 and verse 3. It says, "The food supplies," Pastor says after he gives his greetings, "there are so many things in question now about this. If you want to add anything to your personal food supplies, I say you need to get it done quickly. Remember this one thing when it concerns the house of Yahweh. Yahweh is in total control, and I do believe that 100%. And of course, this is something that we're being encouraged to do. I remember when I first came to the house of Yahweh, but the food storage program, I remember, was something that we had constantly being pushed and promoted because of the time period that we knew that we were going to be going in the Great Tribulation, when all of this was going to be cut off. And of course, we knew the work of Yahweh needed to continue to go forward in this time period, because as prophecy says, and if we'll go over to Isaiah chapter 2 in your books of Yahweh, Isaiah chapter 2 in verse 4, and it says, "He will judge among the nations and will rebuke many people, and they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn any war anymore." And of course, this is what's going to take place once they actually come to the house of Yahweh, as the last part of chapter 2 verse 2 says, they will be raised above all congregations, and all nations will eventually flow to it. Well, they're going to flow to the house of Yahweh, and they're going to learn war no more. But as we just read there in chapter 23 here of verse 3, it says, "Remember this one thing when it concerns you in the house of Yahweh. Yahweh is in total control, and I do believe that 100%. And of course, I hope each and every one of you believe that Yahweh is in total control of his house and of his work in these last days. Praise Yahweh. Not one hair on our heads, brother, will be missing. Not one person will be taken. Satan does not have authority to lay her hands on anybody in the house of Yahweh. We sometimes have to deal with physical weaknesses that take place, but that's all a part of our growing and our building up of the hatred that we know has come about because of the sins, not only in our own lives, but the sins that bring curses in the environment, in the firmament, in the microorganisms, and so forth. I mean, the whole world right now is completely defiled because of mankind's activities and the choices that he has made in rejecting the laws of Yahweh. And of course, as we're talking about this chapter here, the prophecy behind the Pope's visit to the United States, well, the Pope, being that spokesman that Daniel said, is behind or is the one that's the spokesman for the great beast, or the divining serpent, who gets their power from the dragon to bring about all the destruction, all the curses in the world that mankind is suffering right now. It's not only in the world, but it is also in the heavens as well. We can't forget that the heavens are it's a horrible mess right now, and I know it's probably kind of hard to believe and picture what's taking place in the heavens, because we're kind of encapsulated in our own protective little bubble here called the earth, and in our own lives, and a lot of our lives center around the 44 or this area here in Clyde. but the heavens and the beings that inhabit the heavens are suffering the very same things that we are here on earth. They've just been suffering them for a lot longer time. Let's look over to verse 5 there. Pastor says, I read you an article on the Sabbath and the Ten Commandments that the Pope is changing. And the information comes out, there are people saying that article is fraud. They're frauds themselves. I'll show you that, prove it to you. But the Catholic Church is great at psychology. And Malachi Martin, if you remember that book, I don't know how many have actually read that Keys of This Blood book by Malachi Martin. Not too many of you. How many of you have seen the movie? Well, there's no movie, but most people would rather watch the movie than read the book. And it is, like Pastor said, it is a very boring book. It's about that thick, and it's that big, and the pages are really thin. I don't remember how many pages it is, but it's kind of written in the, it's written in a way that it'd be hard to follow along unless you're kind of linguistically elegant in your language. But anyway, there is a lot of information that he put in there and revealing the plans of the Catholic Church, and that's what Pastor refers to very often in regards to that Malachi Martin and that Keys of This Blood. He says, I brought this out to you, and you've got to remember this, whether they carry through with their things, the propaganda that they put out or not. That doesn't mean the man is lying, speaking of Malachi Martin that told this on them. That means the Catholic Church put this out as a feel from the people as to how many would support it and how many would not support it, how many people it would actually turn away from the Catholic Church if they do this. And a great example of that, if you remember, about the time period when gas prices started going up. I remember when gas, this was some time ago, but I remember when gas started going up and it got to about, I think about $1.38, $1.48 a gallon. And I actually had like a paper delivery job at that time, and I'm thinking, man, gas is really starting to jump up there. And I got a mileage or something added to my check to cover fuel, and it got to the point where it was like I was barely breaking even with the fuel comparing with the cost of gas. And now I'd love for gas to be $1.38, $1.48 right now, but it got to the point where, remember, we were almost near, I think in Abilene we were pretty close to 4, maybe at 4 in some places, a gallon for gas. And Pastor says, watch this, they'll raise the price up way high, and then you'll be appreciative of it when gas is like $2 or $3 a gallon. For so long we were dealing with gas at $1 or $1.25 a gallon, and now on average we're still paying about $2 to $3, depending on where you are, a gallon for gas. And so we can see the psychological moves in this. It's like the person who goes and says, I got this thing for sale for $5, and the guy goes, well, would you take 3 for it? Well, I got it on sale for $7. $5 sounds great, And so it's a psychological move in the mind. In the Catholic Church, they put these things out there to see how far they can get away with their tactics of pushing sin and promoting iniquity, to see if the people will take it or not. It's like they did with the pushing sodomy and bestiality and well, maybe not so much bestiality. They are pushing that, but it's sodomy and adultery and fornication. We see that pushed on the television shows, and sure enough, it becomes more and more acceptable. They put it in a form where it's delightful. It's a comedy show. It's a comedy show about this or about that, and then it becomes very delightful or acceptable for the people to accept over a period of time. But they continue to push it over and over. Remember, as it says in Genesis, Satan was more subtle and crafty than any beast of the field. And this is the way she works in bringing sin to mankind. Like taking a frog and slowly warming it up in a pot, mankind doesn't realize that they've accepted the total package of sin. Let's look over to page 244. Let's see here. Look at verse 8. It says, "But I can show you next week the Ten Commandments have already been changed several times. The names Yahweh and Yeshua were removed from the Holy Scriptures, and the Catholic Church admits that they did it. They admit they changed the laws, and it used to be, remember the seventh day, Sabbath, to keep it holy. It's not anymore. Find me a Catholic keeping the seventh day Sabbath at the house of Yahweh. It has to be kept at the house of Yahweh before it's kept at all. Did you know that? Well, praise Yahweh. You can't find them. They've changed it, and they're going to stick with that change. They're not going to repent, as Revelations 9 says, that they will not repent of the works of their hands, nor of the worship of the demons, the serpents, and the divining serpent that she set up. They're not going to change. The Pope is going to visit here. Of course, he came to the United States and he spoke before Congress. And in verse 11 it says, "I actually want to speak to our world leaders in America, the congressmen, the senators, the House of Representatives, and the Supreme Court. The Pope is going to make his visit with you very, very soon with orders from the Vatican from the divining serpent." That's what the word Vatican means, the divining serpent. If you haven't looked it up yet, I'll read it to you. The word Vatican literally means divining serpent, and it's derived from vatis, diviner, and can, which is serpent. Vatican City and St. Peter's Basilica were built on the ancient pagan site called Latin Vaticanus Mons or Vaticanus Colles, which means hill or mountain of prophecy. They know it means hill too, the seven hills of Rome. Anyway, he's going to visit you, government leaders, and I want you to know that Daniel actually spoke of you and this meeting right here for this time period and what's going to take place afterwards. Daniel actually shows you, if you just believe your scriptures, he actually shows you this meeting. If you turn over to Daniel, we'll start. In Daniel 7, of course, he's speaking about this prophecy. He spoke of you and this time period, the last generation, as Yeshua called it, the generation when peace would be taken from the earth. It started with the serpent, as I brought out many times in Genesis 3, 1 through 5, and it shows the serpent there deceiving Eve. There's something that the scholars have never understood. The house of Yahweh is the only one that knows this, and can answer these questions, and we're going to answer them. The house of Yahweh is going to answer them. Now in verse 14 he says, "I'm getting up to it, and if you want to understand it, there are things you've got to do to understand it, but you can if you'll just get the sermons and get the Yisrayl Says program." Of course, now we have the Ask Yisrayl program. I don't know how many have actually had the opportunity to, praise Yahweh, had the opportunity to go on there and look at the Ask Yisrayl program. And you've got to put some effort in it, or you won't understand it. I can guarantee you that. Scholars have studied this stuff for years, and never understood it. They can't understand it because Yahweh shows a way that they can, and let me read that again. They can't understand it because Yahweh shows a way that they can, and they haven't followed it yet. And of course, remember when we talk about, as it's shown in the scriptures, about prophecy and the understanding of the revealing of the great secrets of Yahweh, these things are for the believers, not the unbelievers. And of course, we show our belief in Yahweh, we show our belief in Yahweh's teachers or the ones sent through upholding the things or the teachings that are brought forth from the house of Yahweh. If a person truly believes, then they'll be following the instructions of the house of Yahweh, or of Yahweh who gives these instructions to his house, and it gives a teacher to show us these things or open our minds or enlighten us, as is also found in the word teacher. Let's look over to verse 18. It says, "The king in Babylon was wanting the best of the best to serve in his army." Let's back up a little bit to 16, set the stage on there. It says, if you look over to Daniel 7:8, he says, "I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots." Now this right here shows, as one of the farmers told me, he said he looked this up after I told him about it, and he said this means transplanting, like you transplant a tree. Well, the three that he plucked up were the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. The Herodians owned the Roman army, and they're the ones that were building the Roman army in Rome and also in Babylon. Well, much the same we see right now. You know, the very, very wealthy, I call them Bilderbergers, but I don't think that's what it is. That was a restaurant, I think. Vanderbilts and Rockefellers and, you know, some of the other ones that are out there, you know, they own the armies. They're paying for the budgets of the armies. In fact, you know, if you think just, I don't know, so in the 1920s, you actually had men like, not Roosevelt. What was the one I just named with the R? No, what's the one? Rockefeller. You know, you had men like this that actually loaned money to the government. You know, you had men that were loaning money to the government, you know, to help them out, even in times of war and so forth. And of course, that came with some strings attached, I'm sure. And as we see here, the same ones, the Herodians were the ones that actually owned the army. Well, in verse 18 here, it says the king in Babylon was wanting the best of the best to serve in his army or to lead his army. And he was in hopes that Daniel and his 3 men who were with him, who were also very strong leaders, he was in hopes that they would lead his army. He wanted to enlist them because they were very smart people, very smart young men. So he wanted them, and they paid top wages for soldiers and took care of their soldiers and promised them on retirement a lot of the wealth that they took with their roving army. Now, really, I bet you they were hoping they would die in the war so they wouldn't have to pay out all that wealth, kind of like they're banking on people dying before they have to pay them their Social Security, which is a screwed up mess right now as well. They promised them a lot of this wealth. This is the way the Roman army was built, on promises and lying divinations, but none of it carried through. All it was war, killing, robbery, and thievery. And so, you know, you can't trust the thief. You know, you can't trust the divining serpent who stole these things from somebody else, and then they promise, well, come and serve us, come work with us, you know, come fight for us, and then after it's all said and done and you're retired, then we're going to pay you all this great wealth. Well, they don't tell them that they keep revising the retirement age and everything, and that the wealth is not enough in the budget to pay you your monthly check, and, you know, and people just end up dying. In verse 19 it says, anyway, the Herodians that owned the Roman army stood on the part of these religions, as Daniel 11:31 shows. The army stood on his part, and they put the Lord of heaven in the sanctuary. That was the house of Yahweh. They installed that first, but they never could conquer Israel because the laws of Yahweh were being read to them daily. And there was people that were having the laws of them read, the laws of Yahweh read to them. If you remember Yeshua, you know, he went into some of these areas, the synagogues, and he had the law in the house of Yahweh, and he had the laws. He had his turn where he read from the book of Yahweh. And of course, just that little thing of continuously reading the laws. Even Yeshua said to them, he says, when they stand in the office of Moshe to do his office, his job, listen to what they tell you to do. Why? Because they're teaching you the laws of Yahweh. But he said, don't imitate their ways. Don't practice. Don't follow what they're doing, because, as in another scripture, he said they were hypocrites. You know, they were like the blind leading the blind and so forth. But when they're reading from the scripture and teaching you, yes, listen to what they're teaching you to do. And so Pastor says that's how powerful the laws of Yahweh are once they're heard. And of course, that's why it's necessary that there be a preaching and a publishing of the laws of Yahweh. In verse 20 here, we see the people's ears are closed right now, and Yahweh has to open them. He shows them that in Scripture. No one can come to me unless the Spirit of the Father draws him to me. Of course, that's Yochanan 6:44 there. And that's what Yeshua said. The saying is still true. Well, the reason you're here is that Yahweh drew you to me in these last days. Drew you to the one sent. You know, every single one of us in the house of Yahweh, we didn't just happen upon the house of Yahweh when we were walking down the road. It was already, and Yahweh already foreknew us before the foundations of the earth were ever laid. Each and every one of us had a place in this plan of Yahweh, and Yahweh said he already set the clock to ticking, that he was going to call us out at a certain time to bring us to his house, to put that spirit of calling in us, and we would start inquiring and wondering, what is this tree or this bush that burns but is never burnt up? This fire, this light that burns in the midst of a dark world. Let me go and investigate it. And of course we thought, maybe it was us, but no, Yahweh was the one who was drawing us to him, because no one can come to this house unless this is Yahweh's house, unless Yahweh allows it. So that's why, the saying also goes that the gates of hell will not prevail against us. They don't have the authority to. The gods, the demons, Satan doesn't have any authority here in this house of Yahweh, because this is Yahweh's house. Look at page 246 there. He says there, let me see here. In verse 26 he says, I beheld them because of the voice. That word there, if you look up, means proclamations. If you've ever been to Washington and watched them put in laws, to pass laws, you can go there and see them do this, and you can see the law. Somebody will scan through it and propose it, then somebody else will say, yes, I think that needs to be passed, and he'll brag on it some, and then another one will come and tell you the damage this law is going to bring. But of course they go ahead and pass it anyway. But the proclamations, the voice, which talking about the proclamation, the many laws that were passed were done in this time period, and we see it from the church. We see it coming forth through the governments of mankind and so forth. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of laws are on the books, where it literally makes. Pastor goes on talking about this. Let's see here. He was a retired Louisiana State University law professor, John Baker, talking about all the laws that are on the books that would make anybody in the United States over the age of 18 be indicted for a federal crime. Everybody is guilty of a crime in some way or another in the United States, because of all the laws that they have passed. Literally makes everyone a criminal. The difference between us and other people? We haven't gotten caught yet. They don't have the means to enforce this, because Satan is the one that's behind this, and they have the laws where they can fall back on, where you become a criminal, and if you do something that's out of line or something that's out of the mainstream of what they deem as acceptable, then they can file charges on you. Look at verse 29. He says there, Pastor was talking about in regards to these laws and people in agreements and so forth with Saudi Arabia. He says, shaking hands, I don't know if you know what shaking hands means. I know it because it was taught to me as a child. When you shake hands on a deal, you keep the deal. Now that shows your character. If you don't keep the deal, then you have no character, and you're weak, and you're a weak man, and the word gets out that that man is weak, and you can't be dependent on anything he says. It was surprise, Pastor says, he talks about later on in life when he actually made deals based on how he was brought forward, and saying, I don't need a piece of paper for this. He made deals based on what he was brought forward, and then people broke the deals, and it actually surprised him as a young man growing up, because he thought that integrity, that form of integrity, was in everybody, but apparently it wasn't. Look at page 247. Pastor goes on here because he was talking a little bit more about the laws and all the pages, 23,000 pages of federal laws, and people complain about 613 laws that can be found within the midst of 986 or so pages we have in the book of Yahweh. But there's 23,000 pages of federal laws that are on the books. 23,000. How many, in verse 35, how many federal laws are there again? Many new criminal offenses are deeply flawed. Many federal criminal laws make it possible for the government to convict someone even if he acted unknowingly or without criminal intent. And so he's just talking more about how it makes everybody a criminal. Look at a little bit further up to the next column. It says, the reason this was set up by the divining serpent, because if someone disagrees, he could be tried. As long as you work and stay in line with what they want you to do, then you're fine. But if someone disagrees, then they can bring that man to court with laws that he didn't even know he broke. They can reach back into his past and get those laws and have him indicted and his reputation ruined. And they tried that with the house of Yahweh, but it didn't work. It just lifted us up higher. When Yahweh lifts his house up or lifts his work up as a banner for everybody to see, it's not like always a quote-unquote glorious thing that people might count glorious, like Yeshua was lifted up for the world to see, but it wasn't a glamorous thing. The man hung up there on the stake, dying for our sins, but everybody in the world knows about Yeshua Messiah. They don't know everything about him and what his sacrifice meant and the life that he lived, but they know about Yeshua Messiah. Let's look over to page 248 here, in verse 42 as we finish up here. It says, "This is speaking of nuclear burning, not the forest burning in Oregon," because this is what all these things are leading up to, all these laws and all these proclamations and the sin and the iniquity. Those aren't going to block out the sun. What he's talking about are the bombs. Look at verse 43. "And Yeshua says, when you see these things, know that the end is near." Now, you'd be an idiot not to see these things right now. I mean, they're all over. They're all clear. There is no love left in the world. You see a pope kissing babies that couldn't care less for babies. You see a pope making deals and smiling as if he's getting away or getting his way. This is what you see, the Santa Claus end of it. And of course, none of those things are going to bring peace. They're not going to bring the abundant living that Yahweh prophesies that man can have. And as Matthew 24 shows, that because of the iniquity, this love, the love of many, is growing cold, and we're going to see it end up in the great nuclear burning that's going to only take 1 hour, and eventually the blocking of the sun. So may Yahweh bless your understanding. If you all please stand. Turn over to the Great Khan Malakia.
Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. So we got to continue from where the great priest left off. We'll start on page 249. We'll start at verse 51. What I started to tell you a while ago, when the Vatican, Malachi Martin, brought this out in his book, The Keys of This Blood, and also in his interview. They use propaganda. They are the world's best. They are the world's best at using psychology. They study it all the time. Satan is an expert at it, and she also an inspiration. Their inspiration. That's who they think is going to win. And this is what something, we have to constantly look at the history, of the house of Yahweh from ever since in Genesis with Cain and Abel. Basically, it's propaganda that Cain started using, to kill Abel. Or when you look closely, what does word propaganda mean? It is an information or idea or rumor deliberately spread widely to help or harm a person, group, movement, institution, or nation. Right? So basically, it could help or it could harm. But also because I look at Thesaurus Dictionary and give it this meaning. It said, the fourth meaning, it said, Roman Catholic Church, a committee of cardinal established in 1622 by Pope Gregory, having supervision over foreign missions and the training of priests for these missions. So that's one of the meaning of propaganda. Right? It also give you another meaning that said a school, a college of propaganda. So what basically they actually build a college to teach their priests propaganda. Right? A school, a college of propaganda established by Pope Urban for the education of priests for foreign ministry, for foreign missions. And you know what came to mind when I read this? You know, Yahshua, when he was speaking to the scribes and Pharisees, he said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrite, because you travel over land and sea to convert one, and you made him twice as the son of the grave as yourself." So we see exactly where this started. It started way back in Genesis. You know, this propaganda to spread, to destroy, you know, the house of Yahweh. Now, it was established at a time, and it was the key tool used, as I mentioned, in Genesis, Cain and Abel. Now, when we look at even the history of the prophet and the apostles and so on, we could actually see where they use propaganda, you know, to kill one of the prophets, or to kill or to shut down the house of Yahweh. Right? For instance, in Jeremiah 18. Jeremiah 18:18. Right, let us just look at that. We can actually see the propaganda that is spread, that Cain started, and you know it came right up to the Catholic Church. Jeremiah 18:18, it said, "Then they say, Come, let us devise a plan against Jeremiah, for the instruction in the laws will not perish from the priest, nor counsel from the wise, nor the word from the prophet. Come, let us attack him with the tongue." So we see actually that is the propaganda they started to spread, you know, to go against the house of Yahweh, to go against Jeremiah, because Jeremiah was one of the prophets of Yahweh in that time. Right? So that is what basically they use. And also Pastor talk about psychology. Now, psychology is mental ploys or strategy. Now, the same system used, you know, that psychology in the days of Daniel, with Daniel chapter 6, with Darius, the king. That was one of the individual who loved Daniel. And these men came together, you know, to set up a degree, right? Because they know, well, look, Daniel was so faithful to Yahweh. He wouldn't turn and serve no God, you know, but Daniel only served Yahweh. So they set up this, right? So they know when Daniel won't submit to the gods, a charge will be, you know, brought against him. And when Darius found out, well, look, the psychology these men use, you know, he was in a terrible state because he loved Daniel. But the whole thing is, Yahweh pulled Daniel through that whole scenario, right? Daniel was saved, and Yahweh brought him, you know, through that whole scenario. Right now, in the last days, we could also see, right, and we are living witnesses, the type of propaganda that is being used against the house of Yahweh. Right? We are quite familiar with that. Right? Because no organization, no church in this world could stand up to the teaching or the doctrines that comes from the house of Yahweh. No organization whatsoever. Okay, so, well, okay, we can't beat them with you know, scriptures. What is the next thing to use? Character assassination. This guy, Buffalo Bill Hawkins, you know, look at what he's doing. Right? So they start coming against, you know, pastor and overseer, but it's the same technique they are using, propaganda and psychology. Right? But right now we are in a certain time period last days work where, the gates of hell will not prevail over the house in these last days. Right? This last days work is the beginning of Yahweh's kingdom. Right? Because we fully know, certain promises made to us. Some of us will not die. Right? We'll be changed in a twinkling of an eye. But the whole thing about it, they use constant propaganda, to pull down the house of Yahweh from ever since way back. That's the key thing, they really use. Now let's look at verse 54. What do all Christian preachers tell you today? The law is done away with. How many of you heard that? Christian telling us, well, look, those laws, those old Jewish law, is done away with. It said, all you have to do is believe. Well, Sam said, in plain and simple, it's plain and simple. Can they that all talking with such ignorance that are committing iniquity themselves with their own tongues have fellowship with Yahweh? So, the whole thing, the thing about it is, they say, well, look, okay, the laws is done away with. Right? But the question is, if the laws are done away with, why the curses are still there? Right? Why the curses are still there if the laws are done away with and the curses, because basically they say, well, look, Jesus Christ came and, done away with those laws. Well, something had to be wrong. Because if, according to Christianity, if Jesus so loved them and he done away with the laws and he left the curses there, what kind of love is that? that is tough love. So it don't make sense. Right? And this is what I usually ask them. Well, if the law is done away with, why the curses are still there? Because, they term curses, they call curses as what? Sickness and disease and that type of stuff. Right? They always have a beautiful name, a camouflage name to put over it. Just like heart attack, they call it cardiac arrest. Cardiovascular, thank you. They always have some kind of pretty name to put it. Why they don't just say, well, heart attack? And the same thing. But the difference in Yahshua Messiah, our Savior, and Jesus Christ is what? You know what the difference is? Yeah, righteousness and evil. But here what is the difference? Jesus Christ came and done away with the law and leave the curses. Yahshua came to teach us to keep the law, to avoid the curses. Right? So we're saying, well, look, a total difference between these two individuals. Right? So in a case like that, which one is the better individual, to serve? Yahshua is the better one. Because he's teaching us, well, look, how to avoid these curses. Down in verse 55, it said, and he asked them, can the throne of iniquity, or which contrive evil, you remember the word evil? Do you remember the word evil? Genesis 3:5. Go that route, practice sin, and you will have the knowledge of righteousness and evil like the gods, not righteous like Yahweh. Yahweh said to Cain, if you practice righteousness, you will be like me. And this is the same thing, going back to the Garden of Eden. Right? Okay, let me just finish up this. It says, you will be acceptable for my kingdom if you practice righteousness. If you harbor in your heart or mind evil, you have committed it already in your heart. And you are proven you are unacceptable for the kingdom. So it said, even if we harbor any small thought of evil, we're already committing that sin. Right? So you know, because sometimes people, you know, someone will ask, well, look, if I didn't commit the lust, but you know, it came in my mind, yes, you commit that sin. If you harbor any type of hatred in our heart for our brothers and sisters, we commit that sin. Right? And when we look at Cain and Abel, Cain had a specific job and he wasn't doing it. Right? Because when he was asked, when he said, am I my brother's keeper? Right? When you look at that word, it's to guard and protect. That's what that word keeper means, to guard and protect. So he was asking, am I to guard and protect Abel? Right? So in that way, if we are not guarding and protecting our brothers, we still have that Cain in us. Right? We still going in that way of Cain. And this is what Yahweh is calling us out of. That mindset. You know, we have to come out of that mindset. Because you know, as I mentioned several times, you know, no one of us is different here. No one of us call anyone to the house of Yahweh. Right? As Yeshua said, no one can come to me unless Yahweh called that individual. So every individual that's sitting here, Yahweh is the one that is calling him or called him. So for us to harbor what type of hatred in our heart, you know, we're not agreeing with Yahweh, because this is not any one of us plan. This plan is Yahweh's plan. Right? And Yahweh calls who he feels fit to come to his house. Right? So every one of us that Yahweh called, we are on the same field. Striving to overcome whatever sin so we can qualify. Why we have to strive to overcome these sins? Just going back to the same thing with Cain and Abel. Right? Going back to the same thing. You see, the book of Yahweh is set up in a set pattern. The kingdom of Yahweh is a set pattern. Right? And if you understand certain things, certain history in the book of Yahweh, we'll understand a lot of things that we have to do, or what will be done, or what is going to be done. Right? Because Yisrayl Hawkins will present, just like how Abel present his congregation to Yahweh, is the same way Yisrayl Hawkins presenting us to Yahweh. Right? And we, every individual, have to make himself worthy. That's what the scripture said. Make your calling and what? A what? An election sure. Right? It's up to every individual to make their calling and election sure. So when that time comes, we can't blame and say, well, look, this individual that caused me, blah. You know, if you're standing on a platform that opens out so, like, you know, like that, and you're standing in the center here, from the time you start to make that excuse, boom, straight out. Because everyone have to give account of themselves. Right? Pastor is you know, when someone comes to the house, that person is being set apart. Right? Set apart for a special use. Set apart to be part of Yahweh's family. Right? Every individual that comes to the house, this is what Yahweh is setting this individual or these individuals apart. And how he's setting them apart is by his laws. Right? So we're going right back to Genesis 1:26. Yahweh, we have to allow Yahweh to actually work in us. Right? Because when it said Yahweh gave us his laws, and we know the laws is spiritual. I don't have time to go find scripture because time just running. The law is spiritual, right? And Yahweh is forming a family, right? And he gave us the laws, and the law is spiritual. He is giving us a way to so everyone could think like him. That is how we become in his image and his likeness. We have to use those laws to govern our emotion, every single thing, every aspect of our lives. We have to use these laws to govern it. That is how we become as Yahweh. So as I mentioned several times, it's not this Christian mentality. Okay, well, I'll keep this law, but this law, it's hard to keep. No, it ain't nothing like that. Right? And I remember Yahweh called me in 1997, and there was 3 of us. And we get baptized on Sabbath. That is when we could, baptism could have been done outside of Abel. We get baptized on Sabbath, and the first day, one of the guys fell away. Right? We get baptized on Sabbath, and the first day, what they call Sunday, this guy fell away. And I individually asked him, he said, what is taking place? I know he said, man, those laws, I already can't keep those laws. Right? Because the carnal mind, is in enmity against Yahweh. And this is what the Apostle Shalom was saying. He finds 2 spirits waging war inside of him. Right? And plenty time we love to let the carnal mind make us use foolish excuse, to get away from keeping the laws. Always some kind of foolish excuse coming up, the carnal mind will be putting in our mind, to make excuse. Right? But we have to allow that carnal mind, to die. And the only how we could allow that is by allowing the spiritual mind to develop. Right? That is the only how. The spiritual mind in us have to develop, whereby the carnal mind, will be eliminated. And it's all of this what the Apostle Shalom was showing us, in Romans. All of this the Apostle Shalom was showing us. We have to kind of jump forward. Let's look at verse 64. Pastor, before verse 63, Pastor was talking about Christianity, religion, with this golden calf and so on, and colorful Easter eggs and sale for the dollar and that type of stuff. But verse 64 said no, it wasn't a calf that came out of that mess while Moshe was gone. It was rebellion. The same rebellion that you see in the book of Daniel is being described right here. And this is what when Pastor said it's rebellion, it wasn't a golden calf, but it was rebellion. We still have to remember, all the history of the house of Yahweh, because when the children of Israel came out, what we have to look at. Okay. When the children of Israel came out, when Yahweh used Moshe to bring them out of Egypt, right? And they traveled through the wilderness, which is a few days to reach the house of Yahweh, and it took 40 years, and that type of stuff. And he brought them to the house of Yahweh. And Moshe went up, for instruction and for teaching, how to guide and, Yahweh people, Israel. What occurred? The children of Israel, started to instigate stuff to Aaron the high priest, right? And they actually inveigled Aaron to build his golden calf. Why they choose a golden calf, right? Because this golden calf was a a key god in Israel. Right? Now, I'm going to ask a question. Which one of the gods that this calf, this Apis bull, is a representation of? When I hear the right answer, I'll stop shaking my head. Osiris. That was the god. That bull is a representation because when he died, they said he went to the underworld. And they formed this bull in representation of him. Because you remember when Moshe was going back and forth with Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said, well, okay, no, you guys could worship here. Worship Yahweh across there. And when you look at the side note, it said, they could not worship, in that area because of certain sacrifice the children of Israel used. Right? And one of the sacrifice was a bull, a sheep, or a goat, all that stuff. So if they had used a bull, we will, you could have seen the conflict that would have caused. Right? Because the Egyptian worshipped that bull. And if we look down in history, it has certain religion right now worshipping that same bull. Right? Where did it come from? Egypt. Right? Where did it come from? Egypt. Now, I was looking at our website, and it was kind of, if we don't know the history of the house of Yahweh, we could be, caught up very, very easy, with this. But listen what it said. It said the Hittites were people who worked with iron and bronze. They made statues of bull and cows. It is recorded that their industry and worship influenced religion throughout the known world, with the exception of Egypt. Now, why do I say with the exception of Egypt? Is because all these forms of worship came from Egypt. Right? That's why they say with the exception of Egypt, that have developed its theology thousands of years early. The Hittites and Egyptians gave the world theology, the concept of the bull as a god. In the Egypt name for the bull was Apis, although some were known as Yah. You hear what I said there? Some was known as Yah. Later, okay, hold on. Later, invading Hebrews will change the gender of Yah and create from it Yahweh. So you see, if we don't know the history, this could throw us off and think, well, look, Yahweh was a god. That's why we have to be very close attention to what Pastor is saying. Right? Now, what we have to remember also, when Moshe was going back to Egypt, what did he ask Yahweh? What he told Yahweh? He said, if the children of Israel ask me, who sent you? What he said? Tell them as Yahweh sent you. The father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, if the children of Israel had knew Yahweh or serving Yahweh at that time, Moshe would not ask that question. So that means the children of Israel, when I was in Egypt, they was well engulfed in God worship. That's why when they came out of Egypt and they went to the wilderness, you remember what took place after Aaron built the calf? When they say, well, look, this guy Moshe, we don't know where he's going. This is the God that brought you out. Right? They were saying, well, look, this calf is the God that brought them out. So these same children of Israel, they actually held on to God worship, and they link this article here. That is the time where they link Yahweh, to being a God from Egypt. Right? But Yahweh was never there. Yahweh was never an Egyptian God. Because they totally forgot Yahweh. That is why Moshe asked Yahweh that question. And Yahweh said, tell them Yahweh sent you. Right? So we have to be very, very careful of certain things when we study. Right? Because little articles like this could totally link us, or if we don't remember what we are being taught, it could throw us off. Right? Because even I remember a guy that was approximately near 2000. He had showed me a book that it was Back to Kemet. That was the name of the book, an Egyptian book. And what they did in that book, every individual Yahweh used in the book of Yahweh, they duplicate it. Right? And they have a God with the same kind of character of that individual. And they say, well, look, all these things came from Egypt. They're saying all these things came from Egypt. That is why we have to be very careful. Right? We have to follow the teaching. As Pastor said, we have to know the history. Listen to Pastor and understand the history. Right? So when we come across these little articles, we won't get swayed and think, something different. Right? We have to pay very, very close attention to that. Okay, I have 30 seconds. Okay, let us fast forward. From this point, you're going to be amazed at what Yahweh actually gave to us. And I'm not going to mention anymore. I will leave you sitting on that. But I will tell you, it's going to get exciting. But if you are not really true and know these scriptures and lean on them, you're going to fall. I'm reading from verse 100. You have got to lean on Yahweh. Let me change it. We have got to lean on Yahweh here and depend on Him, being in control of our lives, and He will. Right? So basically, this is what Pastor is saying here. We have to put, we have to put our trust fully in Yahweh, and the teaching that comes from, the house of Yahweh. The teaching that Pastor said, we are begotten from above. The teaching that comes from Yahweh, from Yisrayl Hawkins to His house. This is what we have to actually latch on to. Right? Because outside there is only deception. I don't know, as Yashua Benan said, I don't know who wanted to serve Jesus, but me and my house, praise Yahweh. We will serve Yahweh.